Welcome back to another edition of the Spinnaker Tough Talks. I'm your host, Sheifalika Bhatnagar, and today I'm joined by University Police Chief Frank Mackesy. Thank you for joining us today.
It is my pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you speak to us. And today our topic will be discussing how to bridge the gap between the police departments and the community. This year in 2020, we have faced some unprecedented tragedies, and rebuilding trust is something that both sides are very interested in doing. So let's get started today and talk a little bit about what your background is as a police officer and your experience so far.
So I've been in policing now for 40 years. I started with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office when I was 19 years old, and then I retired 33 years later. So I retired in 2011. Then in 2000, when I left in 2011, I went to academia and I trained police, firefighters, and safety experts. I trained them, and after a couple years of doing that, the job came open here at UNF. I am an Osprey. I graduated with both my BBA and my MBA from UNF. And it was an opportunity for me to come back. I like to say they're never going to name a building after me. You know, I'm not going to be ever in a position to give enough money where they say, that's the Frank Mackesy School of Business. But if I can give back to the Osprey community through my experiences and some of the things I've learned, then it's just a small contribution I can make to an alma mater that I love dearly.
It's always good to come back home to roost and to continue protecting our communities. I have a question for you.
Sure.
As far as becoming a police officer, is there any particular oath that you take in upon graduation from the police academy?
Yes, there is. It's the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics.
Tell me a little bit about what some of the tenets of that oath is.
Well, it basically says that we will protect the rights of everyone. It says that we will remain unsullied in our careers, that we should not use our careers for personal gain or advantage. We should always be mindful of the needs of others, that when we're trying to help out others, it specifically lays out, regardless of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, any of those things, that we're supposed to apply the law evenly and effectively to everyone.
What were some of your thoughts this year as our country witnessed the unfortunate death of Mr. George Floyd in Minneapolis? Were you able to see the 9-minute video, and what was your initial response to it?
Well, when I was with the sheriff's office and now as your chief of police, as the undersheriff for the sheriff's office, or even if that had happened here, the people that did that would have been arrested, charged appropriately for the crime. And then, you know, obviously secondary to that, they would have been fired.
Across the country, police chiefs spoke out and said that if you think as an officer that what happened to Mr. George Floyd was justifiable, please turn in your badge. Police chiefs from Chattanooga in Tennessee, for example, Houston, Texas, and even Atlanta, Georgia, close to home to us, all spoke out pretty quickly that said to their own police force, this isn't something that we're standing for. Do you have any thoughts on the police chiefs speaking out?
Oh, no. Yeah, I mean, I did the same thing. I mean, the officers that are here at UNF are mostly 95% of them are retired. They've been in law enforcement for a long time. And it kind of, at first, it kind of went without saying here at UNF because everybody was saying how wrong it was and it shouldn't have happened. But it also was important that they knew where I stood on this stuff. And they know that coming in the door. I am not, you know, parents entrust us, UPD, with the safety of their children in the absence of them being here.
Mm.
And it is a responsibility that we all take very seriously. And the stories of UPD officers doing things that they would have never done out there in the big world are many. You know, they've given students money. They've helped students find jobs. They've contributed to worthy causes involving students on campus. They're really here because they care about these students and they want to make sure that their learning environment is as safe as it possibly can be.
Mm-hmm.
And any police officer worth their salt who thinks what happened to George Floyd can be explained doesn't deserve to be a police officer.
The physical maneuver the officer had with his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, that act is not something that is within the training or within the proper protocols for police behavior. And also that the consequential death of Mr. Floyd really set the police force back in terms of the ongoing community outreach the police departments try to do to maintain trust and camaraderie with the community. Let's talk a little bit about how it may have set the police back and what that means.
It just means you got to start rebuilding
Rebuilding
the relationship between the police and the community.
Mm-hmm.
So no matter, it is harder to get hired as a police officer than most any other, and I can only speak for Florida. Okay. But so in order to get hired here, you have to fill out an application. Then your application is viewed on its merits. And if you pass the evaluation process of the application, then it moves to a physical test where you have to be able to leap tall buildings in a single bound and, travel at the speed of light. They have to jump out of a car and do some physical things to show they're physically fit enough to do the job.
Mm-hmm.
Then if they pass that portion of the screening, they have to take a written test to show they have the mental acuity to do the job. Once they pass that test, then there is an additional packet of information that needs to be completed about a background. And it's a pretty extensive questionnaire that has to be answered. And they have to provide references and they have to tell us where they've worked in the past. And then they move on to an oral board where all the applicants are asked basically the same questions and they're given an opportunity to answer and they're graded by this panel based upon their answers. And if they pass all that stuff, then they're given a psychological exam by a psychologist. I mean, it has nothing to do with UNF or the police department. It's a contractor, basically. And they tell us if they're mentally fit to do the job or not. And then if they pass the psychological exam, then they have to have a physical exam to show that they're physically fit health-wise, not being able to jump and run and all that stuff, that they don't have something that will preclude them because it can be strenuous. So
I understand.
Then they get hired. So they go through all those steps before they're hired.
Hmm.
Then when they're hired, they have to go through a field training program. And they're required to take tests, show efficiency in certain areas of law enforcement, application of the law, knowledge of rules, knowledge of written directives, that kind of stuff. Then if they complete that, they get to go on their own, so to speak, and they're out there riding around in the community. After all that, they still don't really know what they're doing. My experience tells me it takes somebody about 3, 4, probably 5 years of on-the-street experience to understand how to do policing.
I see.
But once you get out there on your own, then you're on probation for 12 months. And you can be released from employment for any reason with no, that's not true. You can't fire them because of their skin color or their sexual orientation. What I'm talking about, it has to be a job performance-based reason. Say they're coming in sick they're calling out sick all the time, or they're talking or they're being rude to citizens, or they've used excessive force. They have no appellate avenue. They can be let go and they have to move on. Now, the reason I told you all of that is you have to admit that is a pretty arduous task from the time you put in an application to the time you're on your own. There's a lot of stuff there that you have to be able to prove you can do. And you see, no matter how hard we try, sometimes knuckleheads slip through the system. Or maybe they turn into a knucklehead once they're here.
I see.
So to your question, I don't know how they're trained in Minneapolis. Okay, I don't know. But I can tell you, I've been in many a fight with a suspect, and it's never lasted 9 minutes. You know, the suspect is under control, especially in the day of positional asphyxia and excited delirium. There's a lot of these people out there living at-risk lifestyles when it relates to drugs and alcohol. And George Floyd's a case in point. His autopsy showed he had fentanyl in his system. That will flat kill you. He should have been handcuffed and sat upright. And as soon as he said, "I can't breathe," a rescue unit should have been there checking on him. That's how we teach it.
I see. It is interesting that positional asphyxia is part of, I guess that would pertain to the position he was in on his chest on the ground, with his neck to the side, and with that pressure on his arteries in his neck. That
he wouldn't even need to have the pressure on his neck. Just the fact that he's laid in that position with people holding him down, it doesn't even have to be on the neck.
I see.
There have been suspects that have died in the backseat of police cars, laying on their stomach riding to the jail. So positional asphyxia is a very real phenomenon that occurs, and it's been occurring for my 40 years in police work.
I see.
So what you have to do is do the things you can do to prevent that.
I see.
Because if they're laying in the backseat of your car, they start snoring. And it's usually people that are highly intoxicated or under the influence of drugs. Their system just goes to sleep and they never wake up. That's positional asphyxia.
In any of your experiences here in Florida as a police officer, like you mentioned that you've had physical altercations before, and none of them have ever lasted 9 minutes long. And I think that is telling. Let's discuss a little bit about how to handle escalating situations in which physical contact occurs. What are the ways in which a police officer can de-escalate the situation? And from your experience, what are some ways that police officers can restore the peace in a turbulent situation? So
in 40 years in law enforcement, I bet you I've handcuffed many people. 99% of them were compliant and do what is asked of them. I don't know how many people I've arrested over the years, but I bet you the vast majority of them, when they're going through the back door of that jail and the door closed behind them, I know you're probably not going to believe this, but most of them turned and thanked me. In those years when I've had scuffles, I bet you in my career, I've had to literally fight maybe 8 or 10 people.
I see.
But I've arrested hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the manner most good cops don't want to fight. First of all, we're not supermen and women. We're people just like you. The difference is we have a little training on how to deal with people. We carry a badge and we carry a gun. It doesn't make us a badass. It doesn't. Most of the people that I arrested through the years probably could have taken me if they wanted to. But the way you treat people, even amongst the criminal element, I've had some really, really bad guys. When I was a detective, I was a robbery detective. And I went after some really, really bad guys. And I can tell you with just a few exceptions, most of them, because I treated them with respect, returned the respect. I didn't like the fact they were going to jail, but it made it a little easier because it was done in a respectful manner.
So respect is something that's important when dealing with potential confrontations. And I want to discuss a little bit of some things I've seen across the country in response from police departments in an effort to rebuild trust and respect with the community. So there are, for example, in our own backyard here in Gainesville, Florida, there's an officer who has started a basketball cop foundation. He was an officer on patrol that was called out to children playing basketball in the street. And instead of showing up, I believe his name is Officer Bob Smith, he started playing basketball with the children. And his dash cam video from his car ended up going viral across the internet. And pretty soon, people were sending basketballs to the police station to encourage him to continue going out and doing this kind of thing with the community. They said, go here and play with these kids in this neighborhood. And after a few years, the officer started a foundation in which he now has spread this playing atmosphere with officers and children playing basketball across the country, from Florida to Brooklyn to California. That is just one example of one individual officer who took the opportunity, instead of punishing children for being children, essentially, help them understand the rules and help them develop a relationship with him. And he took the initiative on that. And there are other officers, for example, in South Florida, policing Hispanic communities is very important, and officers that come from a diverse background that can speak Spanish and develop a sense of camaraderie with the communities, were able to actually solve many cases that were isolated in a certain cultural community, whereas just by developing relationships, just by being able to speak the language and understand the people's needs and fears of, that community. Again, in California, for example, there's an officer who'll go to skate parks and skateboard with teenagers just to show that, I'm just a human being. And even on TikTok, for example, a social media that a lot of young people use, there is a common thread called Cops of TikTok that try to just tell funny little stories while they're on duty of things that they come across. Sometimes they'll do TikTok dances, sometimes they'll just share a funny little story. So there's this effort to humanize the police. And at the same time, there is still a great deal of fear and anger and grief of people across the country that are still not sure if they can trust the police. There's something about having a badge that makes them different. So let's talk a little bit about some of those things.
I can tell you, all those things have been done. I've been involved with them. Jacksonville had the second police athletic league in the country. It is now, when I left, it was either the first or second largest police athletic league in the country. And we were funding it through the off-duty hours that officers worked. So if they worked off-duty at a bank, let's say, we would charge the bank an extra $1 an hour, and that dollar would go to fund PAL. Plus, there were other things that funded PAL. But that was good for about, I want to say, about $350,000 a year. We put the PAL main campuses in some of the more suppressed neighborhoods of Jacksonville. We created after-school programs. We started it with basketball. We created after-school programs where we were doing mentorships. And the people that were doing the coaching and the people that were doing the mentoring and teaching them karate and how to work a computer and every skill, boxing, were all police officers that we assigned to PAL. This is a few years ago, but there was we were starting to see more and more Spanish-speaking people coming to Jacksonville. And what we found that is the criminal element was targeting the Spanish community because, number one, they were probably here without proper papers. They were working in a cash environment where they would be working on construction jobs and they were getting paid cash. And then what they would do is stay in a hotel room, and they'd stay in the same hotel. And there'd be several rooms of these workers, and they were getting robbed. They were getting shot. The women were getting raped, and they wouldn't call the police. And the reason they wouldn't call the police is because they were afraid, because they were here without papers, and they were afraid they'd be sent home. Well, John Rutherford and I, the sheriff at the time, he allowed me to create the International Affairs Unit. And what we did is we found officers that spoke the different types of Spanish of the people that we were encountering, and we sent them out to the community just to talk to them. Imagine being a woman that gets raped by a stranger and can't call the police. And when I think of that possibly being my daughter, it just makes my blood boil, because the police are here to help. I know what the national dialogue is. I know what you see on TV. I'm telling you, that's the exception. That is not the rule. It's not. But what happens is all the good stuff that's being done by police agencies, it's never on the news media. Now, social media helps with, you said, like, you know, every now and then somebody will shoot a hoop and it'll get picked up on the internet and it'll go viral. But you have to put this in the context of reality. That probably gets 1/10 the playing time as something like what happened in Minneapolis happened. That blows up, goes worldwide, and it's all over the place. And then we being the good police, get painted with the same brush as the bad police. So what that means is, I will tell you, it gets frustrating. Because I've been a cop for 40 years and I never had an internal complaint. Not one. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't deserve one every now and then, but they didn't complain. You know, we all have good and bad days. And what I mean by that is I might have said something I shouldn't have said. You know, I never did anything illegal or beat anybody up or anything like that. But sometimes I can be a smart aleck. But if I didn't think that I could do some good by helping others, I wouldn't be doing this anymore. And what's interesting to me is one person being killed by the police in a criminal manner is one person too many. But what I can tell you is, of the hundreds of thousands of arrests that are made a year, most of them in the 90-something percentile are made in a law-abiding manner. There's no wrongdoing. I can just tell you that it becomes popular to jump on board I rode predominantly black neighborhoods for a lot of years. And those little kids in those neighborhoods loved me. I kept snacks in the trunk of my car for them. I'd pull up. When I first started riding the beat, I'd jump the curb and drive my police car towards the basketball courts, and they would run. But after a while, they got to know me. Mm-hmm. And I'd give them candy and, you know, snacks and all that stuff, talk to them about going to PAL. That stuff happens all the time out there, but you never hear of it. The other thing, too, is I didn't do that stuff because I wanted recognition for it. I did that stuff because I viewed it as my job. It was my job to let those little people know, hey, I'm here for you. I can also tell you, not just the little people. You see, there's a majority of people out there in all these neighborhoods. You defund the police and you pull the police out, they're going to be afraid to leave their homes. They support the police. But they're afraid to be vocal in their support because of what will happen when the police are no longer in the neighborhoods, even if it means we're gone for a few days. And I know this to be a fact because people have told me this. And they've told me this not only through the years, but recently. So I am not discounting what happened. It was wrong and it should be dealt with. And I don't know how they deal with things in Minnesota. Hopefully they're going to deal with it in the manner that it should be dealt with. But what I can tell you is that happened on the other side of the country, and it set back policing in Jacksonville, Florida, 10 years.
Well, there is a longstanding fear of the police, and I'm not sure if it really begun back in the 1950s and 60s during the civil rights activism and the protests that were met with police hoses or fire hydrant hoses and police dogs, or if it re-sparked again in 1991 with in LA with Rodney King. But throughout the last few years, there have been, let's say throughout the last 10 years, there have been hundreds of people of color who have died at the hands of the police in one way or another. And it just continues to reiterate this narrative that the police don't care about Black people or people of color.
I don't agree with that. I don't think it has been hundreds.
Enough to say that this is happening too much. Like you said, just one situation is too many.
But remember what I said also, most agencies have that same process you have to go through to get hired to be a police officer.
Right.
As long as there's police, I don't think it's ever going to stop because people go bad. And you can do everything in your, agencies have a responsibility to try to do everything they can to identify people that might be going bad before they can go bad. Or when you have signs, look, I'm not proud of this, but in my career with the sheriff's office, I bet you I fired a few hundred people. And I've put numerous people in jail for excessive force, improper use of force, stealing, embezzlement, using their job for personal gain. It has to be done. Because if it's funny, I was talking to somebody the other day. Under my tenure as undersheriff, there wasn't a corruption incident related to the sheriff's office. There were incidents where people did things they shouldn't have done, but it wasn't corruption. It wasn't systemic. It was individuals doing things that they shouldn't have done. And we reacted to them swiftly. And the reason you have to do that, because it sends a message to all those other cops out there. Hey, if you screw up, you're going to be held accountable. And that is what the key to all this is accountability. Now, what happens is the mob mentality kicks in, and be damned the circumstances. Doesn't make any difference. Somebody had a gun, and you shot him, it doesn't make any difference. It has this snowball effect. And I think what it's going to take is rationally minded people on both sides of the equation who may not always agree, but can come to some sort of common ground.
So how do we start that conversation between people who do feel victimized by the police and the police officers who are trying to make sure that bad apples or knuckleheads, as you said, in the police department are punished and put behind bars if necessary for crimes against the community? How do we bridge this gap? Because what I'm seeing in our country with a myriad of issues is that we have this us versus them logic, and it's like a revolving door. And every time a new incident happens, it just spins the door more and more and more, and we get caught up in this me versus you mentality. And that doesn't do anything to fix the problem at hand. There are debates in the streets and protests between the Black Lives Matter movement, which is trying to simply say that we need to respect the lives and the humanity of Black people and bring them up to the base level of everybody else in this community, because they have been historically disenfranchised and targeted. And police brutality is just one example of how people who are African American fear for their lives on a daily basis. And it's an experience that is not truly shared by other groups in our country, other demographics. And it is something that we do have to pay attention to. That argument or that position on Black lives do in fact matter. Let's pay attention to their safety. Let's protect them as well as the rest of us, is met with the argument of, well, that's an anti-police sentiment, and, you know, blue lives matter or all lives matter. And this creates what I'm talking about, the revolving door logic of me versus you versus me versus you, and the solutions are never discussed. And that is part of the reason that we're having this conversation today, is to find a way locally and to just start that dialogue, to continue it even in the face of differing opinions.
The sheriff's office they've had those dialogues going on for years.
Mm-hmm.
They meet regularly with members of all communities. They have sheriff's advisory councils, and every sector has representatives. And they have a relationship with the police department from every community in Jacksonville. Not certain, every community. And then they all get together. It used to be every quarter. I don't know what it is now. So one part of the community could talk about what's happening in the other part of the community. But until we get to a point as communities where, Nat Glover once said, when a child is killed in the north side, every mother on the south side should weep, and vice versa.
Mm.
Because, and I've been a proponent for what most people don't want to get involved until it touches them. But if we all get involved, many hands makes for light work. But the thing is, there's extremes to every initiative. And you got to do away with the extremists. Because no matter what you do, unless you capitulate and do what the people on the far end of the spectrum want versus what the other people on the opposite end of that spectrum, they're never going to agree to get anything done. What it's going to have to take is the people in the middle. But the problem is the majority of people are silent until it touches them.
I see.
And that is something that, to be honest with you, I do believe that we've been successful in that somewhat. But what happens is when stuff like this boils over, most people just don't want to get involved in the drama.
I think that there is a risk aversion to getting involved in very tough topics because our country has developed a habit of forcing people to be extremists and only really giving light and attention to extremist views on any side of an issue. We do not live in a dichotomous world, a binary world. We live in the gray. Real life is lived in the gray area between extremes. So at least that's my opinion. And so reinvigorating these conversations it's a constant practice. It's not really about whether it affects somebody's life personally. I think being educated on these issues is an ongoing pursuit. There are different kinds of setbacks as well that the community sees. I don't believe that people want to fear the police or hate the police. I think that there is...
Just for the record,
yes.
Most people don't.
Okay, for the record, most people don't.
The areas that need the police the most are some of the areas where there's the most mistrust.
Correct, and that is a real issue.
And it is a critical issue. But the only way that you can trust somebody is to know them. And you have to take the time to know each other. And that's why we do all kinds of outreach here at UNFPD.
Let's talk about that.
We've done coffee with cops. There was more cops there than there was students. We do these little seminars on going home or going to spring break, how to take care of your car. So if you break down, we'll teach you how to change a tire. We, teach you how to check the oil before you go, make sure that the vehicle's going to make it so you don't break down on the side of the road. 3 or 4 people will show up. We'll do some things in housing about the effects of drinking and driving, and we'll get these goggles that are designed to make you feel like you're drunk when you hadn't had anything to drink. And then we'll put you in this little buggy car that we have and let you drive through cones. And it's fun, but it's educational. Hardly no one shows up. I made a point to go speak to groups of students at night because, students got to go to school during the day, go to class. I spoke to one group that had 1 person in it. I spoke to a couple of other groups that had like 2, 4, now I never took any of that personally because number one, I think students are here to learn. And so, and UNF is a pretty demanding school scholastically. When you leave here, you have a pretty good education, I think, a real good education. My wife gets mad at me because I say pretty good about everything. I said, man, this steak is pretty good. And then I get in trouble. But
I can see that.
And then the other thing is, student government does their survey, university climate survey. And when I looked at the survey at the end of last year, the numbers for safety and feeling secure on campus and all that were very high. Numbers that I would have loved to have had at the sheriff's office, because we do the same type of polling there every year. And we did it by zip code stratification so we could get an impression of the whole city. And there's always, all I can tell you is, I've got 31 officers, 32 counting me. And all we can do is every single day work on this campus with positive interaction with students. That doesn't mean they're always going to be positive, because you have to remember, we're the enforcement arm. We're the ones that are telling you if you're doing something wrong or not. And there are people who don't like to be told they're doing something wrong.
Were you able to sit down and talk to students about race and maybe about their personal experiences with cops, whether they were positive or negative?
Yes. There was a Black Lives Matter rally. It was a forum that was on campus. It was over in housing. And I wish the news media had been there, because the students, and it was open to the public, so it wasn't just students, But the dialogue was driven by students.
Mm.
And listening to them, you know, it was eye-opening. And they made some good salient points about how they feel and what they experience. But the reason I say I wish that the media had been there is because it was such a respectful conversation. And it was an example of what the broader community needs to see in order to, that's how you get things done.
What were
More
your
recently,
takeaways from that meeting? What did you gain from that?
well, that students do fear that people of color, who happen to, in this case, most of them were students, do fear, you know, interactions with the police. But I tell you what really hit home with me was, on a more personal level, was recently the Cody did those virtual seminars, whatever they're called. We Can't Breathe. And it was a Zoom that was open up, and there are people of color on this campus who are my friends. Some of them hug my neck every time they see me, tell me how much they love UPD, and their words broke my heart.
Mm-hmm.
Broke my heart to the point where I felt compelled to reach out to them just to tell them that I heard them.
Mm.
Then I did those two things, and then there was the candlelight vigil.
Mm-hmm.
After they were done, I made everybody in my agency participate with me in the Zoom meeting. I made my entire command staff, you know, participate in all three of those things. Now, we didn't talk, we just listened, because what they're saying was important.
Mm.
And every single member of this agency heard my heart. And I told them, these are people that support us. These aren't people that hate the police, that want to defund the police, you know, that have other agendas for our country. These are people that truly support law enforcement, and they're scared to death. But what they did say to me on one-off conversations was they didn't really feel that way on campus. It's when they left and went to the big world. But we're reflective of that. So what we need to do is do everything we can with our interactions on this campus to make sure we're building a bridge between the police and people of color, so at least they don't feel scared when they're interacting with us.
Thank you for your time, Chief Mackesy. I appreciate this conversation we've had today. In your words, you believe that accountability, transparency, and respect are the tenets that we can use to bridge the gap between the police and the community. Do you have anything else you'd like to say before we end the show?
Yes. The fourth thing I would like to add to that is empathy.
Empathy.
Because you need to put yourself in other people's shoes sometimes. But what I also want to say is this, but I love this university and I care for these students. And when I hire people, I ask them, can they care for the students as much as I do? And I haven't had anybody say, you know, no, they don't yet. But I also haven't anybody prove it in their actions. They're here because we recognize the importance of, we want to be the example that when they get stopped by a knucklehead police officer, we want to be the standard that they say, well, that guy's not like the guys at UNF, you know? Now everybody has bad days, and some days, everybody has bad days, but we care about our students and our faculty and our staff. And We want them to be safe here. We want them to have a positive learning experience. Or we don't, at least I don't want it to be a negative experience because of anything that UNFPD does. So again, we care about them and we're here for them. And if they need us, all they have to do is call us. And we're going to work to build the bridge of trust back every single day.
I appreciate your time today. I hope you have a lovely day. And for our viewers at home, I'd like to thank you for watching. This has been another special edition of Spinnaker's Tough Talks. I'm your host, Sheifalika Bhatnagar. Thank you to Chief Mackesy for coming out and speaking to us today. Tune in next time for another episode.
Swoop.